All right. Welcome back to class, everybody. Today is Monday, August 31st. So today we are starting our content for world history here at Franklin Simpson High School. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about what makes up a civilization. All right. So for the next 2 weeks, what we're going to be talking about is our earliest civilizations. And we're going to be talking about 4 of those specifically. And that's going to be Babylon, Egypt, the Assyrian Empire, and the Persian Empire. Those are going to be the big 4 that we talk about. There's a lot more that we could mention, but we were out of school for 3 weeks here at the start. So the content that we get to cover here at the beginning is going to be a little bit limited because we have so much to cover later on. So what I want to do today is we're going to start with content. Remember, after you watch this video or while you watch this video, during whatever you want to do, make sure you get those Google Forms pulled up because I'm going to be answering those questions as we go. I'm not going to be saying the questions out loud and what the correct answer is, but I will be answering those questions as we go throughout the PowerPoint. So if you have that Google form pulled up, that's going to make that a whole lot easier for you. So right now I'm going to open up and you should be able to now see the PowerPoint for today. Now, I'm going to try not to do PowerPoints too often. I don't want to bore you guys to death, but PowerPoints are a good way to get a lot of information out there. I'm not going to do 2 PowerPoints back to back. I'll never do a PowerPoint and the next day do another PowerPoint, or at least I'm going to try to limit myself and try not to do that. So yeah, without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started. So we're going to be talking about Western civilization and what it means. Okay, so in order to know that, here's some of the questions we're going to be asking and answering as we go throughout this lesson. So our objectives are to be able to answer these questions. So what are the characteristics of a civilization? What is considered the spark of civilization? When we say spark, what we're referring to is what started civilization. Because when people first emerged on Earth, we weren't civilized. There wasn't civilizations. There weren't cities. There wasn't laws. There wasn't order. So what was the moment? What was the event, or what series of events, kickstarted us towards civilization? And then we need to define Western civilization specifically as we move forward. More questions that we want to answer. What does it mean if culture is civilized? Now, I just want you to think about these. I know it says discuss with a partner, but just think about it for right now. If you're on your own, if you're watching the video right now, what does it mean if a culture is civilized? What's the definition of being civilized? Pause the video and think about that for a second. When you're done thinking about what the word civilized means, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go, the next question says, what does it mean to be an uncivilized person or an uncivilized culture? So if you know what civilized means,
teachers, Dr. Darnell has ordered and we have received slushies for everyone during the old front office. You can choose straws here as well. I think we've also dropped 1 or 2, so we need a custodian. If there's a custodian in the building, please come to the front office. Thank you.
I could edit out that announcement. I could just edit it out so it'll skip over it. But this is what the virtual experience is missing. You guys need to know what's happening here while you guys are at home. Some slushies just got dropped in the front lobby. So they got to get somebody to clean that up. We really miss you guys here, and you should know that. But back into the lesson. So if you know what a civilized person is, then you know what an uncivilized culture is. So what's the difference between a civilized culture and an uncivilized culture? And once you understand that, then you know what a civilization is. So let's get started a little bit. So when we say what sparked We're talking about what brought us from here to here. What brought us from caveman culture, which was barbaric, it was native, nomadic, move from place to place, no permanent structures, moving around all the time, to where we are today, which is the complete opposite. So how did we get from here to here? There's a lot of steps in between. Of course, we need to start with step one, which is what motivated us to get from here to here. So when we talk about the spark, we're talking about the Neolithic period. All right, that's pronounced Neolithic. So Neolithic period refers to the people that lived during the end of the Stone Age. All right, so the Stone Age is marked by really nomadic people. And when we say nomadic, we mean that they didn't live in one place. They picked up and they moved from place to place, no permanent structures, moving all the time, following their food, hunter-gatherer cultures, that kind of stuff. So we're referring to the Neolithic period here. So food, it was hunters and gatherers. They were nomadic, like we just said. Their housing, they moved from place to place. Their tool making, they made tools out of stone. And we're talking about before civilization when we talk about this period. We're talking about prior to civilization. Their politics was tribal, which means it's very different from culture to culture, but it was largely based off of tradition. It wasn't voting or anything like we have nowadays. Very tribal, so in tribes within tribes. And then their economy was almost exclusively hunting and gathering. How do you get food? You hunt it down or you gather it. You don't buy it from somebody else because there's no money, there's no currency, there's nothing to trade because the only thing that has any value is food. So what are you going to trade for food? Because the only thing that has value is food. You know what I'm saying? If you're confused on that, be sure to drop a comment on the video, either via YouTube or via Google Classroom. I'll see it. But if you're confused on anything, if you have any questions, of course, email me or drop a comment. And then clothing, animal skins. That's pretty straightforward. So why do we call this the prehistoric period? We call this prehistoric. So we're talking about world history. We're going to start in the prehistoric. So what happened before history? So pre meaning before and historic meaning history. So before history. Why do we call it prehistoric? Because there's no historical documents that tell us of anything specific that happened during this time. You know, we know some things about things that were written afterward that reflected back, but nobody wrote anything down during this time. Nobody gave their firsthand experience. Nobody talked about what it was like, and nobody wrote anything down during this period that we can have as a reference. So that's why it's called prehistoric. And I'm pretty sure there's a question about that in your Google form today. Prehistoric, before history, and it's called that because of the lack of historical documents that we have. And that's our starting point, is prehistory. So what sparked civilization? What got us started? What got us saying, hey, we want to stop being nomadic. We want to stop being hunter-gatherers. We want to start a more civilized way of living. So what sparked that was mankind's desire to stop being hunter-gatherer and start being food producers. So rather than looking around for what food is around and trying to get it, what if we just made our own food, we had it, and then we could just eat it that way? And so growing your own food, agriculture, farming, crops, this kind of stuff, this is what first transitioned mankind into civilization. So this is where we went from uncivilized to civilized, is when we made the transition from hunter-gatherer to food producer. When we went from where's the food, how can we get it, we need to track it down, we need to gather it, we need to hunt it, we need to kill it, then we can eat it. When we went from that line of thinking into what if we just put seeds in the ground, let it grow, and ate that? Food producers instead of food gatherers. That's when we went from uncivilized to civilized. So here are characteristics of a civilization. So instead of gathering the food that you need for right now or hunting the food that you need from right now, when you grow it, you control how much there is. And that means that you can grow more than you need. And that's when we have a surplus. A surplus refers to more than you need of something. So you have a surplus of food, meaning you have more food than you can eat. That means that you can trade that food for something else or sell that food to somebody else. So a surplus of food and irrigation, and we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of irrigation and early civilizations later in the week. Large urban populations. So before civilization, everybody had to be very spread out, because if you're all in one area, there's only a certain amount of food in that area and a certain amount of animals in that area to track down. So there's not going to be enough for everybody. So everybody had to spread out, very thin. So there wasn't large areas of people and large groups of people. It was mainly just families, a couple groups of families, no more than about 20 people in a traveling group for your life. And that's who you knew. And that was it. So once we start growing our own food and we start controlling that, we can live in larger cities, larger populations, and create urban areas because we have food now. Because we can create and grow our own food, we can have cities because there's enough to go around. There's a surplus. So there's enough for everybody. Specialization of work, what that refers to is, hey, you have different talents than me. Maybe you can grow food better than I can, but I can hunt food better than you can. And this guy can create things like pots and pans that we can use to cook the food. Maybe we all do our own thing instead of all of us having to do all of it for ourselves. So instead of me having to grow my own food and track down food and go collect food and make pots and pans to cook it in, we're all going to do one of those things, and then we can pull our resources. So that's what we refer to as the specialization of work. And then we have complex governments and economy, and we're going to go into a little bit about what those look like for each of those four civilizations that we talked about. We talked about the Babylonians, Persians, Assyrians, and Egypt, and the Egyptians. So we're going to talk about how each of those governments and economies looked, because they were all very different from one another later in the week as we go through each of those. So the dawn of civilization. So these are all the transitions that were made. So the first transition that we mentioned was the transition from a hunter-gatherer culture to creation of food. So planting food in the ground and growing it and harvesting it. So that was the first transition. Then all of these transitions followed as a result. So instead of having tents that we can easily pick up and move so we can follow the food around, we can build buildings that stay and are permanent wherever we decide to grow our food. So now we're not moving around, now we're staying put. The discovery of being able to do metal tools over stone tools was very important, because those are just better. Stone tools work to a certain degree, but their wear and tear is very quick. And metal tools just work better. They just do, and they're a little bit sturdier. They hold up a little bit better. So when they started being able to make metal tools instead of stone tools, so you can settle wherever metal is instead of having to move around. Stone is the only thing that's everywhere. Metal's not necessarily everywhere, so you could only really rely on stone. So then we have, when you go from a tribal rule to a monarchy is when we have a king and a queen who are in charge of the kingdom, and tribal rule is a little bit more sporadic on who's in charge. Animal skins into processed textiles. We're going to get into that a little bit more in the weeks to come. Agriculture into specialization. We talked about the specialization of resources. So I don't have to grow food to profit from people growing food, because I can create pots and pans. I can create luxury items. I can do whatever I need to do, and we can all share the wealth. So, and we talked about nomadic tribes into cities, same as tent into mud buildings, and anarchy into law. So instead of everybody just do what you want to do and we'll all try to survive, it's let's all come together and help each other survive, and all live by these certain rules while we do so to protect each other. So when we talk about civilization, we are going to be referring mainly to Western civilization, because this is the civilization that's taking off right here in the Neolithic period. So other regions, East Asia, South Africa, South America, Australia, there are people in these regions, but they don't become civilized during this period. They become civilized a little later. So this is Western civilization that we are talking about right now. We are going to get into those other areas and those other groups of people, but right now what we're talking about is Western civilization specifically, and that refers to Western Europe, North Africa to an extent, but not necessarily. I know there's a question on there about who is involved in Western civilization and what regions we're talking about. And Africa is one of the answer choices. It's not the correct answer choice for this question, because we're really only referring to Western Europe and North America right now as who is becoming civilized. We will learn about the other groups at a later date. So that's all the information we have today. That's the civilization. That's the dawn of humanity and civilization. That's what we talked about today. The first civilizations and what made us start being civilized. And we're going to go into a little bit more specifics about certain civilizations and their specific characteristics later in the week. But for right now, make sure you head over to the Google Classroom page, finish the Google form, and that is all you have for today. Remember, all your assignments are due on Sunday night, but it's Monday. That is 6 days from now. You might want to go ahead and do this now so you don't forget about it and get counted for no points or half points. So make sure you go into Google form. You can do it while you watch the video. You can do it after you watch the video, whatever you want to do. But make sure you get that done. Other than that, I think we are all set for today. So if you have any questions, let me know. It is Monday, so remember that first, third, and fifth, we meet today. First period at 10 o'clock. Third period at 11 o'clock, and fifth period at 12:30. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Email, comment, whatever you got to do. All right. Later, Wildcats.